Mathematics for Social Justice is a problem-posing pedagogy that involves students in co-creating a just and inclusive world. In this talk, they focus on practical suggestions for engaging students of all ages in learning mathematics through the lens of social justice. So with that, welcome to both of you and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you. So as Paul said, I'm a math educator, been a high school teacher for many years, and I'm at Fresno Pacific for the past 4 years. I teach in the math ed program, graduate program, and I teach some undergraduate classes in math as well.
And I just graduated from the program here in math education. So I'm a newly hooded teacher here at Fresno Pacific. I teach online classes in the Center for Professional Development. And then last semester, we had the opportunity to launch Fresno Pacific's first course in teaching math for social justice. So it was a graduate course, and the activities that we're doing today are actually drawn from that online course.
Both of us met 3 years ago, and Candy expressed her interest in teaching mathematics for social justice, and I was super excited because you know, just finding someone who has that common interest. We are in fact doing some research together as well. We presented at a conference last year, and we hope to be continuing to do that research. Okay, so let's get started. Okay. Which button will move this forward? Okay. So when we have presented or talked to teachers about teaching mathematics for social justice, 2 common questions come up. First of all, what does that even mean? What does teaching mathematics for social justice mean? And what does that look like in the classroom? And as Paul said, that AIMS has been focusing on equity pedagogy and what social justice mathematics or social justice teaching means. So today what we are going to do is kind of paint that with a broad brush for you, just kind of recap what the main ideas are in teaching mathematics for social justice, and then hopefully do a couple of activities that you can probably take back to your own classes, share some more strategies with you that you can find hopefully useful for you in your own teaching and journey forward. We will also be interviewing a couple of students from our previous course in teaching mathematics for social justice. And with that, I'll ask Candy to get us started.
All right, so before we address these 2 questions, let's try a thinking exercise. At your tables, you will find a copy of these cartoons. And so to begin, we'd like you to partner with one other person at your table and come up with 2 questions that you might ask your students about either one of these cartoons. But one of the questions that you come up with should involve mathematics.
These were actually submitted by 2 students in the course that we had last semester.
You're welcome.
Yep.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
You're making that connection between. Oh, so no.
So, you can wait. Well, it's a span. You can wait. Yes, for equal wages. want to know that.
Right.
So I mean, what does it suggest about it?
Right.
It makes you think. Yeah, but-
I know, I want to ask you, like, why are these, what are those dollars?
And so, question here would read in mathematics.
Oh.
It's still a
So the pink ones are. So just, I just looked at the blue things.
Maybe a couple more minutes.
Where does it? Sorry. 13.9 $18,000 an hour. Where's it go? And it's online. It's like 5 of these turns to 100,000. Yeah. So what are they using?
Describe the
So here it is.
Percentage?
Describe everything.
How much more percent?
Overflowing with places. You know, I love
So my assumption is that this is.
It's a 30 seconds. Okay.
Okay, so let's come back together. What questions came to mind as you were reading these cartoons? Yeah.
The McDonald's one, question that would be fun for the time research is finding out if $15 is even, and where it's a livable wage.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, cost of living is a factor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Questions?
What does the first cartoon suggest about equity in the workplace between men and women?
This would be a good question for International Women's Day, Women's Week.
Online, somebody asked, what would the CEO's new income be if he personally gave all employees a $1 raise or a $5 raise?
How much longer would women have to work to make $1 million at this rate than men?
Mm.
How much is McDonald's paying all of its workers on a yearly basis? This is just one person at 18,000.
Mm.
What percent is that compared to the CEO?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Anything else? So these two cartoons were submitted by our students in the Teaching Math for Social Justice course, and they're just a great, quick way to begin conversations with your students about issues of inequity that exist in the world. So as Dr. Joseph mentioned, one of the common questions that we encounter as we talk about teaching math for social justice is, what does that even mean? And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to hear a student perspective on what it means to learn mathematics through the lens of social justice.
Social justice math is when you do math that matters. It's like real things, real problems that go around in the world. When we do our math questions that are based on those problems, and not only are we doing our math, but we're also learning about the problems, and then in the future, when we get our jobs, make a change about what we're gonna do about that problem, even though we learned it years. When I do social justice math, I also feel upset at the same time. I feel upset because it's very surprising to know that things like this happen, but it's really interesting. You feel like you can make a change and like a fun way to learn. It's not like, oh, John has 2 apples and Sally has 3 apples. It's like that's not really like a cool way to do that. Like lots of teachers do that. But the way our teacher teaches us, it's like really different and it's really
Yeah. So going back to the basics, what does research say about what teaching mathematics for social justice is? Teaching mathematics for social justice drew on critical race theory, which really talks about liberation. Liberation through education and challenges those dominant ideologies. So Paulo Freire is a leading educator and a person on whose work a lot of these ideas are based as we think about teaching mathematics for social justice. Paulo Freire argued that education is an act of liberation and that it necessarily must lead to a societal action. And therefore, students are no longer just empty vessels to be filled, but equal participators, having equal opportunities to access their own liberation and the liberation of their communities and society. The other leading educator is Goodstein, whose recent work, Reading and Writing the World with Mathematics, is a text in many of the courses that are taught in the country. Goodstein talks about 2 things: reading the world, and that's inviting the students to look at issues in the world through a critical lens of mathematics. And then writing the world. And writing is challenging those inequities, challenging what they see as injustices in the world through mathematics. So having the capacity and the agency to restructure and reframe the world and make that change in their communities. So these are the 2 major research perspectives. Teaching mathematics for social justice can be thought of as this idea that's supported by 4 major pillars. So in a consolidation of literature from several sources, this is what it says. Central, one of the ideas or one of the pillars of teaching mathematics for social justice is strong content. Often the idea is that when you're teaching for mathematics for social justice, you're kind of touching on the content, not so much focus on the content, but that's not true. Rigorous content is absolutely essential in teaching for social justice because good, high quality mathematics is essential for equal access and opportunity for our students. Right? And therefore, content is absolutely important and central to teaching for social justice. The second one is pedagogical. So decisions that are made in the classroom to include diverse ways of thinking, allowing students space, not just to do individual work and autonomous thinking, providing that quiet time, but also having opportunities for them to, work with an elbow partner or share in small groups or even critique one another's thinking. So pedagogy is, again, the way the classroom is framed to include all of those diverse ways of knowing and learning. That's another pillar. And the third one is the context. Understanding the students' lives, what they bring into the classroom, their culture, their language, and recognizing that all of that is going to influence what they learn in the classroom. And not just influence, but absolutely, and for the teacher to actually engage those things so that the student actually sees themselves as reflected in those lessons that are talked about in the classroom. Thinking about context, I always think that students bring with them prior experiences. And often that connection between their prior experiences or their experiences outside the classroom and what they do in the math classroom are not necessarily connected. And because of that disconnect, there's a feeling that what they're learning in the math classroom has absolutely nothing to do with what's outside. Like the little girl said, it's not interesting anymore. So to make it really central, make their experiences central to what they're learning in the classroom, that's part of teaching mathematics for social justice. And lastly, of course, is social justice itself. So giving a place for student agency and voice. Like Goodstein said, reading the world through mathematics and knowing that they have the capacity, they have the agency to rewrite that world, to restructure things, and to change what they see as injustices in their own communities and in the world. So that's a brief kind of in capturing the essence of what teaching mathematics for social justice is. So now we will go ahead and do a task.
Yeah, so the graduate course that we taught introduced a lot of social justice math tasks. And so we're going to try one of those today. During my first year of college here at Fresno Pacific, Mattel released a talking Barbie. And one of the phrases that the talking Barbie used was, math class is tough. You could pull the string on her, and that's what she said. And so I remember when this came out, and especially my fellow female math majors and we were just outraged by this and couldn't believe that such a gender stereotype was built into a children's doll, a children's toy. So eventually Mattel, there was a lot of pushback, as there should have been, and Mattel eventually removed that phrase from talking Barbie. She said a lot of other things, but math class is tough. But today, Barbie is actually going to help us use mathematics to examine an important social justice topic. So for today, I want you to consider the question, what would Barbie look like if she were as tall as you? Imagine that Barbie could be recreated to be as tall as you are. What would she look like? So at your table, you'll find handouts. There's a lesson, and on the back, it has a table that you can fill out. All of these tools here are there to help you explore this question. And just on a side note, I did run these Barbies and figures through the sanitizing cycle of my dishwasher. So they, at least right now, they are germ-free. And then the other thing is, if you intend to do this lesson with students, I would recommend clothing them. These are from a thrift store, and they did not come with clothes, but I do recommend putting clothes on them for classroom use. So in groups of 3 or 4, you will select one person in your group to compare to Barbie. So maybe as a part of that process, have the conversation, who in your group do you think most represents the American population in terms of size, all of that, size, shape, gender, color, all of those things. And then decide who in your group is most average. And then after that, you will record all of your data. You can use these to your dimensions on your Barbie. There are some male figures, there are some female figures. You can kind of walk around and trade for the one that you want. And then when you're done filling out your table, you should pick up 2 of these pieces of butcher paper. On one of them, your average person will lie down, and you'll actually trace an outline of that person. And then using your measurements, your calculations for Barbie, you will take another piece of butcher paper and draw your life-size Barbie. And you guys can feel free to write down any observations, measurements, whatever on the butcher paper. When you're done, take a piece of tape and stick them to the wall, and we'll get to kind of take a quick gallery walk to see what we find.
a few decades ago, I was thinking, Anglo-Saxon, which may still be the case, I don't know the numbers, but we have so many, we continue to have so many other countries. But then my second thought was, what's the definition of American? Does it mean citizen of America?
All right.
Illegal immigrants? Yeah, like what's that definition?
I can subtract.
So there's a lot that goes into it.
So then it's just like where you're at across this way, it was like around. Well, okay. I think outline.
Okay, so we need a barbie.
You want this in inches? So that's just.
I say and I'm also thinking, like, I lived in Australia for a little while. My family. We've always considered
7.
And but we're like
Can I ask you a question? So I can hear this.
American, like actually like Mexican. What does American look like?
What does that look like? I'm not sure how tall this guy is.
It was pretty much blonde hair, blue eyes, and 15 and taken aback, but now like my first moment just now. Well,
I'm freakishly tall.
I'm serious. I don't understand trying to get such average. This would be a concern of mine. Average.
So then I shouldn't be the average person either.
Okay. What do you got?
76 inches. At 15. First thing Tammy said she's wrong. There's 29 cents. Can we just round down 193? Yeah. Sure. That's 29. These are round. 193. Yeah, like 29 or 29 that or
You don't even need.
you need to write a Barbie.
Oh, got you.
So 193 divided by 29.
Now we just get off the bar.
6.66. Yeah, I read it up. What am I doing? You go with 3 decimals.
6.
Now it's just 6615.
You're using me.
So bus is 16. Can you draw? Yes. What's the next one? Waist is up here, right? Yeah.
So are we measuring each of us and that's how we figure out the average, or?
You need that, right?
Yeah, if you wanted to.
4.5.
He's trying to get his waist back together. He's got that work.
But we are set up now to everybody can do 2 weeks.
Now, when I think of
Oh, wait.
height-wise,
You see this?
like body shape,
I guess they can turn on the
So real person. Just.
Well, we do need yours too. Barbie scaled in real person.
112.
So just go flat. Waist.
Do we, or do we just do these?
We'll do both.
3.96.
Suck it or don't? 90.
So it starts at like 6 to 36, so 30.
2.5.
Just round, I rounded on this good. And then we need legs, arms, head, and neck. Where are you doing on the leg?
I mean, that is the issue. outside.
Yeah,
They're
I
very
mean-
self-conscious.
Yeah, no, it's an issue, especially
But you're doing language.
with kids, like, no matter what age they are.
Especially if you're adults.
Yeah.
Yes, from your pelvic bone.
Yeah. And also
So
no
you
matter
don't
what
like
age.
Right?
Take off like.
No, I did.
Guys, do I have
You did
my?
a great job. That is
6.91 though. From the neck.
Are we doing two fingers? Two fingers? Wow, that's very nice.
You know what?
I was afraid.
More than that.
Okay, so next to the water.
Adam, no. Does he have one?
No?
So I started to.
So length and legs. Where did you do it on you?
Yeah.
The inside, that's why going inside my body.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, gone through that process, that's. Know exactly how much I weigh every morning. Gotta keep track of that.
We're getting really super distracted. So she has group. Yeah, it's almost like I should. Feeling that you're the most height of person to height of our ratio. How tall are you?
5'9".
I think we find that right.
How tall are you?
5'7". The ratio.
Yes.
In your dreams.
Really? See if they'd accept it.
Yeah, no.
In your dreams.
Well, we had that conversation, and then it depends on where you are. And it's 0.655. Times it by that. We were even talking about this. 16 minutes, I mean, and no, you're right. Not that they would be comfortable with that. You know, second grade, it would be probably not a big deal, but it might seem a little even awkward, even in some ways. But then like middle school, then you've got
No
those,
way.
you know, because you've got the
And then
variance
people
of how
are like touching you and stuff.
Read
You're
the
like,
instructor.
how do you
Right.
go around that?
So lots
It
of,
should be
like
the
I said,
same.
we've gotten distracted.
There's good conversation in this.
Yeah, you might want to.
She needs to come down here. Don't give any answer.
You know if you were here.
I know, right? Tell her Angela said.
Yeah, sure.
Angela said. we go.
6'6".
All right, Bang, you're doing
Reading minimums for Barbie and.
For you or for who? Are we doing them for you?
Well, Barbie actually.
Okay.
One and nail one, right? Isn't that part of the team?
That was when I was curious about to see.
We can do either or.
So you have to repeat.
Since you already know your measurements, we could do that.
We're gonna start with a male suture. For all of that.
That's really weird because Ken dolls are like
10, he's a male.
yeah.
The male.
Chosen male model.
Have they really?
Yeah.
It's interesting, yeah. Yeah, I'm glad this group. When they did.
Barbie legs are seven.
Well, that's how we know. In real life, what would that look like?
Yep, you hear us.
Hi, Aaron.
Miss you.
Should be all the same.
Yeah.
We were a little bit confused. So we just go by my
So,
budget.
we started the Central Park.
But we weren't sure how to find cars.
Okay.
Divide
What are we
by
doing,
the-
inches?
$8,000.
Oh, it is, yeah.
Well, I guess it's.
Oh, from Margaret's height to.
Yeah, so that's the control.
That's
your.
scale
So
So this is gonna be the ratio of the real person.
This is metric.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's
String
all
would be
metric.
easy.
Yeah, just do the height.
This.
So 170 over. So that's our ratio.
Exactly 5 inches.
87 weights.
That's the weight.
Pretty close to Barbie.
Should be. So take some of these. By 5 inches. There you go.
You got the ideal man, do you wanna get traced on the wall or on paper? Hey, you don't need to do math.
Yeah, there it is, right?
Right here, mathematically. Put it in your
Right.
numbers for you.
This is length, right? And all the way up to the top of the.
Okay, so what are we gonna do? Oh, just trace me and then
Trace you and then.
change the size.
Hey, at least you know you don't have a big head.
Whatever
Yeah.
we have to do.
You wanna be on the wall or on paper? So you gotta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Now.
Yeah.
Why are you going like that?
I remember that purpose.
This is actually this was relying on the.
They're just gonna trace it.
So we gotta measure like the length of his leg.
Only for,
The length of his-
well, I guess you could do it up on the wall too.
And.
Oh, my goodness. It's like 2 inches.
Farther around your head than your arm.
Yeah, they probably.
So now we need to get a real person and scale. What's that? That doesn't seem.
I should do your. They're having way too much fun.
I guess I thought about it.
Wait, leave the hair up there.
Oh, Barbie scaled would be like if she was a real person. So
Got to the real person next.
I guess we use, yeah, maybe we feeling factor, yeah. So 5'9".
4 6/8.
69 inches.
Gravity.
69 divided by 5.
What's the scaling?
Ratio using the same.
So-
And Amanda,
They were in our.
So
I think we would do 5 inches times 6.
Right.
Would be how
Oh, I see.
wide
This-
the bust.
So the head, taking the.
Yeah, we can do it.
Okay.
Well, it's a
Your
second,
height.
you're both 5'9", yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah, so then it would be.
36.
Accurate measurements?
30, yeah.
The scale. Bigger person 6 times.
You could know.
So that makes sense.
You wanna draw, are you drawing small?
Yeah. 95%.
I'm monster.
Now we have to
Race
draw.
is bigger.
I'm dividing real person by Barbies.
So now we have to measure you.
7.5. Oh, the last two.
Oh, wait.
Okay. We're gonna need to stand back. So. Where does that start?
I measured from the bottom of his feet to his hips.
Scaled up his head. Long line, but like
34 and a half.
Longer.
2.07.
Hands, hips, or right?
Yeah. The head and the neck were like
Same.
legit.
And then
No, if his legs are on his
Yeah, they come down.
same height as you. So yeah, just do it like here. It's close to your blade. 1.08, so like for all of us. So probably 40.
like the ratio here to the arms.
You did arms from the tip of our fingers, right?
Yes.
Oh, so it should all be, shouldn't it be the same?
Yeah. Did you go all the way there?
It would be. And then it should come out the same.
And then so does
Yeah, check. Should I sit down?
Oh,
That's
Perfect. It's like, yeah, gloves on.
so which ratio?
he's very tall, short arm.
How do we know how wide
To the real person is.
Wait, your head's smaller, there's big, his go around it. This one goes no. So you're doing it. Okay, yeah, right. The neck is bigger, but his head is.
It should be the same. If
You gotta go straight there before you gotta go around. You gotta do like smaller. His neck is not.
So now we look to see if that tight skin.
real person. Oh, to real Barbie. It should be
Ratio of
close to
real
1.
person to Barbie.
If it's, if they're similar, like the real Barbie is the same, for the same height, then arm length should be similar. Our shoe size should be similar. Not, yeah.
Doesn't matter. I'm thinking because this one is the first.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's going to be.
There, it won't be one. It won't be one.
It should be. Yeah, like the 79.
I would say.
Yeah, totally.
His head's bigger and his neck is smaller and so those should be smaller.
Yeah, then you start to get into something. So they have their idealized human body. And we can see what they think about the human body. Yes. Right.
2.65.
Yeah, that's. Uh-huh.
39 inches.
Yeah.
So how about we give ourselves 15 minutes?
552.
15 minutes?
552 for the last one.
He pretty much is. His head's
I'm
smaller.
gonna take this home to my wife. Got the perfect stand.
Got herself a Kindle. See all the guy that was trying to turn this all a Kindle? Don't need to look that far, right? Don't need to spend.
There it is.
There you have it.
Wow, so it's pretty close.
See, I didn't want to do mine again because mine looks really Barbie should not be mine. 14.
Yeah. Yeah, she does have a proportional large head. And I have to
Yeah,
Okay, so now we can.
Oh.
Sit on the wall.
You can, if you want to, you can do it on
Yeah,
the
you
wall.
can place it on the wall if you
Place
want
it on
to.
the wall as well. That's what
There's.
It's Monday. Day after.
You're like, so this makes me is a very right, you know. Yeah.
All right, I'll take one for the team.
All right, yes.
Where now is this US type or world population? I guess it's even higher.
For sure.
Yeah, that would make it
Yeah,
worse.
they would make it worse.
I know, right? What'd you guys do? Which one did you do?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
And you picked this?
Oh, that one
Yeah,
there.
they just need one compared to.
Size of the neck is just disturbing. Movies, TV. Your wife, when your body image.
I mean, no, all of the kids.
Oh, yeah, it'd be.
But wouldn't we just take this ratio? Are we?
Look at princess.
Is that one of the?
Are we good? Wait. Yeah.
Yes.
She's probably in a higher percentile too for female height. So I'm interested to see your if this tall.
I'm really.
So if I'm 69, so we like.
Although I don't know if I'd want to do it with high schoolers.
Right.
I don't know if I'd be so brave. I might.
You've known them for a while. You wouldn't do that on the first.
No.
As a substitute, you don't want to do that with them.
No way.
You probably have chaos and you'd probably have to get qualified. Right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually.
There was a lot of inappropriate touching in
Yeah,
that
right.
class today.
Show me on the doll.
Yeah.
And we do arms.
Big ones So in-person classes, they're doing it all online. Up there, oh my gosh, she's like in the epicenter of.
They've been pretty, yeah, they've been pretty level.
Okay.
The other states were-
Sorry, 39.62.
Okay.
And so they're like, well,
Because Barbie ended up taller than.
their attitude was monitoring it, we're keeping track. What's going on? But a week and a half from.
So they're gonna go through, right?
Yeah, she's there and. Asking Aaron.
Picture the legs again.
So she could come home when she wants. I'm gonna be able to study more here than I am.
Totally.
I'm just gonna sit here. That's what you want. We'll ask you in a few days.
Yeah.
But the local folks
Seven
are
over
all
there.
dispersed.
I wonder, Dylan today wonders if they'll just cancel school entirely.
You mentioned like size.
Yeah, what, I don't know. As a parent, what does that mean for money? Like, does he have to take, I don't wanna have to pay for all this stuff again. Barely afford it the first year through. Yeah, a lot of big questions. And I think our main concern right now is making sure that he's able to get home. And then also making sure around grandparents that he's not, you know, exposed to it. That there's no risk of exposing them to it. That's our biggest Smaller than I would have anticipated.
Very disproportionate.
I get 6 fingers.
I think it's because their arms are so fat when I drew Barbie that it looks really weird.
So I'm next week. I'm gonna work on that too. Yeah, you need to.
Oh my gosh.
My double chin.
So just have one more.
Over there.
If you look, it's almost like
Yeah, it's right. So the males are pretty out.
70 different shades.
not sure.
Men are.
Yeah, they definitely won't fit.
At least
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like I can be a Barbie now.
Yeah, exactly. You can.
Value, because you have a car and a little bar. But you have two different radii. Is Blue the doll? But I just think that it's so, but it's also expressed. And that's really.
Somebody in the
Something to strive for. Okay.
Someday I'll be that girl. Someday.
Things that I think we want. Hard to have the.
Oh, you still remember.
Containers. Yes.
It totally is.
Okay.
Good?
Yeah, I think they're all done.
Okay, so. You're kind of Barbie-esque. Tall.
Okay, let's go ahead and come back together. And so I just want to ask first, was there anything about your findings in this process that surprised you, shocked you? What did you wonder? Any of those questions? Or even just general observations about your process as you were finding your calculations and making decisions.
I was expecting the Barbie to be way disproportionate. Because I know that the females usually are.
Hmm.
I've heard that a lot. Apparently the male's not. At least that one.
Right, this is male.
At least that
That
one.
one's male. That's female. This one's male. And then there's a female in the back. What were the conversations that were happening as you were working through these measurements?
I'm sure we use the same units.
Just practically, okay.
Was that a dig?
How did you decide who was average in your group?
That was part of the conversation that took place here, is depending on where you teach, that might look very different. And how do you determine that? And what is the true definition?
Yeah, because you had pose the question as, what does the average American look like? And so my first thought was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, or at least like a few decades ago, that's what we would have said. But our country continues to gain more and more cultures, people of more and more cultures. And so I don't know exactly who, like what average would be. But then my second thought was, well, what is American? Like who determines who's included in that? Does it include only citizens, or does it include illegal immigrants, or and many others? And so you have to determine that definition also.
We had a tough time with like the average because like just our heights, none of us were like average. Like we looked up our height like percentile wise, and both of us are 99%. And then we had like
I was 27.
27 and like 40% like percentile. And so it's like our heights are not, none of us were like average like for America. And so we were like, well, like so we have so
And you have some diversity in your group right there, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of what questions does this activity raise? And also what can be done in response. So one of the important aspects of teaching math for social justice is that students have a chance to respond to these challenges that are being brought up in the conversations that you have. So what kind of response might you support in your students to this lesson specifically?
Let me speak. There's a question that we had that might affect the answer to that. I think that this activity might want to generate is it was a little difficult. Some of the math was difficult because we were doing circumferences, head and neck, chest and waist. It was hard to translate that up on the board when we were trying to do linear, because none of these are circular. I mean, we know enough about pi to have tried that. But I think part of the effect of the activity was compromised a little bit by trying to figure out exactly how to make those kind of correspondences. I know part of what we critique of Barbie is that what this woman would look like if she were in real life would be Scarlett O'Hara, you know, just a big, small little waist. Yes, but that would be part of the challenge, math challenge of this.
Yeah, and I think this group kind of similarly thought about it and took just like flat measurements, like what would, if you would just hold a tape against, that's what I observed that this group was doing to kind of overcome that issue of translating a 3-dimensional into a 2-dimensional image. I also noticed that you know the male models seem to be somewhat acceptable, if you want to think about it that way. But look at the female proportions. So I'm wondering if there are some decisions that went into that, and how that might affect our female students.
So one of the reasons we determined who was going to be the average real person for us was because we used me because my body shape is very similar to Barbie, but that went into the stereotype of Barbie is average where she's not. And so we didn't think too much about doing a real average of a real person. We just used my body shape because it was similar to it. So yeah, ours was probably kind of skewed.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I think it ties into also the opening activity as well, when we were talking about, you know, women and pay and things like that. You know, that connection could be made too, where there might be some young ladies in your class that might say, on a minute, I have concerns about this. And the paper says, Barbie, what are the dimensions of Barbie? But then it says repeating the exercise with male superhero action figures. And the average male student. So it references male superheroes versus just Barbie.
Or a Ken doll.
Yeah,
Which we
so
have.
it was like,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I think one thing, like doing this in the classroom is they give the students, okay, well, now that we found it's disproportionate, what do we do? Like, do we just say, okay, Barbie sucks, or do we do something about it? You know, like, what can we do about it? Because I mean, I think that was one of the big things, was just not just showing them there's inequity in the world, but what can we do about it? So like, I'm like, let's write Mattel a letter or something, you know, something, so that they can show how to use math to complain about things, you know, like, 'cause they like to complain a lot. Now let's use math to support your defense and actually do something.
That's fantastic. I saw this, I saw a blog where a middle school teacher did this lesson with students. And so she challenged her students to write a letter to the Mattel company and to use their mathematical calculations to point out that this is not realistic, and then to suggest how Mattel company might modify Barbie's shape and dimensions to make her more reflective of the average American, or at least more realistic. Okay, so at the end of the session, we will provide you with more information, including a link to this site. This is a site called Dying to Be Barbie, and they have a lot of infographics and a lot more information about how Barbie has influenced, and just the media in general, how has that influenced girls' body images, their self-confidence, and their mental health, their emotional health, their sense of well-being. And so I think it's important to point out in talking about issues of justice with your students, it's so essential to be mindful of how this might connect with students in your class, and to be supportive of them as you're talking about these issues. And so we had talked about, even, you know, with middle schoolers, the whole idea of body and how awkward that can be, to have somebody measuring, and in middle school you're so uncomfortable anyway in your own skin. And so just consider some of those aspects before you launch a social justice, and have an awareness, and be tuned into your students, and have maybe even follow up with conversations with your students afterwards.
Any final thoughts on this activity before we move on? Okay, I'm going to ask 3 students who were in our course last semester, Teaching for Social Justice, to come up. Cherise, Leslie, and Tammy, who's online, and maybe we can project Tammy on the screen so we see her as well. And I'm just going to ask them to first introduce themselves. And then I'm going to ask them a few questions, and then maybe we can all kind of find out more about their experience. You prefer to stand? Or, I mean, if you want to sit there, or you want to sit on chairs, whatever you're comfortable with. Chairs are nice? Whatever you're comfortable with. Pull up that one. Is Tammy with us as well? Okay. You want to introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'm Cherise Nussi. This is my second semester in the math ed program. fifth year in education. I taught 7th grade for 4 years, and now I'm coaching 6th through 8th grade.
I'm Leslie Rouse, also my second semester in the program. I teach high school, and I've been teaching for about 17 years. So I wanted to start learning new things.
Do we have Tammy? Anyway, while Tammy joins us, I just thought we in our course we had students reflect about their identity and their positionality and how that impacts the classroom. So I'd like Charisse and Leslie to talk about that, about how reflecting about your positionality and how that impacted your classroom, influenced you.
I think one of the things, and Candy kind of just touched on it, was just like being aware of my students and who they are and how I might be different from them or think differently from them. But also like how it kind of changed my perspective was just thinking about pieces about like the role of the teacher as in the pedagogy of the oppressed. They talked a lot about like the banking method versus the problem posing method, like just the role of the teacher, like why they're there. Am I here to like give you my knowledge, or are we all here together to learn and face a problem?
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was interesting to do a lot of all that reflection to see where I actually stand on things, and there were some tough things that I was like, whoa, what do I really think about this and stuff. So doing that reflection was really helpful to see how I respond in the classroom. Am I responding because that's what I should do, or is that something from my background making me respond that way? And we've had a lot of conversations in my class about common sense, because we'll say like, oh, that's common sense, why can't you do that, you know, type of thing. Not we, the students. And I'll talk to them about like, well, you know, common sense for you is not common sense for someone else. And just being able to be like constantly reflecting on how I'm affecting students' perspectives as well as how I'm responding in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes. There you are, Tammy. Did you hear the question? Would you like
No,
to
I'm sorry. I was getting the little one out of the bath.
Okay. And introduce yourself to us first, and then respond to the question. How did reflecting on your perspective, your identity, your positionality, and how that impacts the classroom, how did that change your practice?
So introducing myself first, I'm Tammy Prince. I have been in the program. This is my 4th semester now. I really enjoyed the class when we had to take the time to reflect on ourselves and our own experiences, not even just in learning, but like our upbringing and the social stereotypes that I surrounded myself with or grew up around. I had to really look into those, and I thought, oh, some of those were really interesting to find out, especially given I teach at Madera right now. It was interesting to see how some of those I had to start looking at things differently given our student body. I went to Clovis Unified, so our student body there was different from the student body I have at Madera. I know one thing that was really challenging for me, given that was not imposing some of my first thoughts and taking the time to listen to my students, as well as allowing enough time. That was one of the I noticed when I first started doing some things like this, I didn't allow for enough time. If I noticed they struggled, I tried to help. And sometimes in helping or giving an idea or suggestion, I could see some biases being put into that. So I had to learn how to reword things or re-question things so that students could think in their mentality in that way, and that my perspective wasn't being pushed onto them.
So my second question is, what did you learn about teaching mathematics for social justice? And you can take this in any order you like.
Okay, you like routine. One of the things I learned, because I just thought about like teachers who maybe aren't bought into this, like it was nice that you guys really reemphasized that like mathematics is the purpose of the lesson, and it is like the basis for it. It just takes the context from being a pseudo context, like that little girl in the video mentioned at the beginning about giving apples and more apples, to something that's real and something that matters. And I think that impacts student engagement and motivation and buy-in and wanting to do something about that, which was another important piece. Like if you do this, then give them something to do about it or talk about that, and giving them a vehicle for that. The other thing that I thought was, just there's like a wide range, like if you're not super comfortable, or what you think your class would be capable for handling, whether it's maturity wise or whatever, like there's a wide range of topics and you can kind of like dive as deep as you want to, or not yet.
I'll go. Oh, okay. That was one thing that came up often in this course too, like having students to feel comfortable in saying their opinions and not being judged or belittled from their opinions. So that was one thing I know I picked up on, was I have always tried to work on that in my classroom. So I tried to start with some smaller things and model that we, are accepting of everybody's views, that there isn't a right or a wrong, everybody has their own opinion, and to be able to listen to those critically and I don't know if conductively is the right word. What word am I thinking of? Productively, I guess. So that was something I really worked on in my classroom before I started introducing some of these things. I know that was something I really focused on, and I totally just sorry, I got nervous trying to think of that word.
You're among friends.
I know. I'm sorry. What was the question again? I had an idea.
What did you learn about teaching mathematics for social justice?
Oh, I learned the buy-in, like Sharice was saying, that's what I was going to comment on. It really helped with that. I teach a senior problem-based math class, so a lot of those seniors are taking that class because they need the third-year math class. So they haven't really been the typical successful or have had a positive outlook on math, period. So a lot of them have made comments in my class, just like, I really like that we're learning this, and we actually get to apply it to something that matters and that's going to make a difference in our lives and as adults. So I have liked to hear that as well. They've also learned to question, and I thought that was neat. I didn't really even think about that, but they learned to question material. So if I presented something, they didn't just think my word was gold. And that's something like we kind of brought up, like even nowadays on Facebook and Instagram, just because it's on there doesn't mean it's true. So that was something that we started adding in it as well, is do your research, see if these things are true. And then questioning, is Wikipedia really a good source? It just opened up a lot of windows for things to talk about and discuss with the kids. I really liked it. I learned a lot about my kids and a lot about them and who they are and their community, because I'm not from there. So it helped me learn a lot about them as well and their surroundings.
That's awesome.
For me, when I first started like looking at the types of things that we were talking about, in my mind, it was always, those are topics for the history class and those are topics for the English class, but not for the math class. And I really like to see how we were able to bring in the math that we're learning in the classroom to explore these topics. And it made me really have this desire to team up with my math or my history teachers and my English teachers, and let's do this together as opposed to separate things. This is all stuff that we could take this one subject and do it in all of our classes, and the kids can actually like see how it affects them in all areas. And I really liked seeing how those topics could come up in the math class.
That's awesome. So I know that you've already kind of touched upon this and talked about it a lot, but how did this translate into your work? How did it impact how you teach? I know that Cherise is a math coach, and the others are in the classroom. So how did this impact your work?
And just to put a time on this, we have about 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Tammy.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, it made my problem-based math class a lot more interesting. Just in our district right now, there wasn't really too much of a curriculum outlined, and I've always ran something of that in my previous job. So I kind of ran like a financial literacy and ran it as a course like that. But I loved how it really tied in because I touched base on percents, fractions, decimals, ratios, and you know, we did cover financial literacy kind of in the beginning, looking at loans and interest rate, but it also opened the door for them to have tools to utilize during their investigation of these social justice issues. So they were able to look at ratios or percentages and take those and apply it to these social justice issues. So it made it a lot more interesting for me. I know I also tried, because I was taking the problem-based math class too, to integrate both of those ideas. So sometimes the problem based learning, as far as having to impose a problem and things like that, became challenging because they weren't used to doing that, but they really did enjoy learning content and then being able to apply that to something they're going to use. And it made my job easier because who likes teaching kids that don't want to learn? So, you know, and math was one of those hard subjects. So it was really nice to see their engagement.
Would any of you like to add something?
Yeah, I also thought about just like from a district perspective, looking at systems like, are we supporting our EL students and giving them equity, and our special education students, as well as like something that you mentioned in the beginning with the 4 pillars. Like when we were going through the class, I kept thinking like you really have to have strong classroom management and like a safe culture to do social justice conversations, and with a really safe class. And so I felt like it's kind of now with coaching, like that's kind of like my third layer. I'm like, do you have classroom management? Like, do we have content? And then like, this is something that you can kind of build it.
And one thing I really enjoyed was all the resources we got, because being completely new to this idea, I'm like, I don't know, but the Mathalicious website, the book, the Goodstein book that we got, just all the resources of being able to find things that we can use in the classroom, and I keep bringing them up to my team. How about this? How about this? And so that was really helpful.
And in case you're wondering about those resources, you will have access to those resources as well. So we have just a minute or two if you have any questions. It's kind of to open the floor. And I know that we have some students who are also in the course. So anyone who would like to ask a question, and anyone can respond.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Okay. It was my great privilege to read Candy's master's thesis that she wrote in conjunction with work that you did in your classwork, and it was one of the best theses that I've read in my 12 years being the dean. Exciting to see the thesis, the way it was developed, the way it was connected to the work of the program, but also how you plan to extend it into other activities. I'm sure this is one of the things that has come out as a result of that project. So again, kudos to you and to you, Manjula, for the work.
We're very proud of her.
Thank you.
It's been exciting to see.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else? Okay.
Okay, well, that was a great segue to the final slide.
Yes.
Our promise
Thank
was
you,
to make
Tammy.
this very practical.
You're welcome.
Social justice math in action. And so we've curated a list of all of our favorite resources. This is the book that Leslie mentioned. Most of our activities were drawn from this book. And if you just bought one thing, this would be the book to buy if you're interested in teaching math for social justice. But if you want to take a picture of the bit.ly link, it will take you to a Google Doc that has live, active links. So it's recommended reading, lesson resources, all of the Barbie lesson handouts are there, as well as communities who are talking about teaching math for social justice. So you can continue these conversations with people that extend beyond this room. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Manjula. Thank you, Candy, for this very engaging time that we've been able to share. Thank you all for being here. For those of you on Zoom, thanks for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful evening. We'll see you back here in April. So check your email, check our website for our next talk, which will be the first week of April. And until then, we'll see you. Thank you very much.
Lots of hand sanitizer.
Thank you so much. I am so grateful. And just to hear your feedback too after the class, that means so much. Thanks for being here.
First one's